The Harborview Grand sparkled that night. Crystal chandeliers spilled light like diamonds across the polished marble, the kind of scene people pay event planners a fortune to recreate. Waiters glided between round tables draped in linen, silver trays balanced in perfect choreography. You could smell champagne before you tasted it, crisp and expensive. For most people in that ballroom, it was an evening to celebrate power and legacy. For me, it was the night my life split in two. I'm Elena Hayes, 31 years old, born into a family where last names mean more than first names. My father, Arthur Hayes, is the founder of Hayes Hospitality, a boutique hotel chain threaded up and down the New England coast. To Boston's business elite, he's a visionary. To me, he's a man who's always treated love like a contract with terms and conditions. That evening was the company's 30th anniversary celebration. 200 guests filled the ballroom, investors, media, competitors pretending to be friends. Everyone wanted a seat at Hayes Hospitality's table. My mother, Claire, floated between groups in her sequined gown, flawless as ever, making sure the cameras captured her best angle. My sister, Rachel, stood beside Dad, dazzling, sleek, perfectly polished to inherit the empire. I sat 3 tables back, sipping water instead of champagne, trying to convince myself that showing up was the right thing to do. Family, after all. Maybe this time would be different. The speeches began. Rachel spoke first, graceful, rehearsed, all about heritage and vision. The crowd adored her. Then Dad stepped to the microphone. His voice filled the room the way a storm front fills a harbor, commanding, inescapable. He told stories about the early days, how he mortgaged his future on a rundown inn, how he built an empire from grit and sleepless nights. People clapped at every pause. He talked about loyalty, about how family was the backbone of the business. I waited for the dig. With my father, there was always a dig. Then his eyes found me. Family, he said, pacing slowly, his champagne glass catching the light, is the foundation of everything we stand for. Some people honor that foundation. They dedicate themselves to protecting it. Others, his pause was deliberate, heavy. Choose to tarnish it. The room quieted. You could feel curiosity prickle through the air like static. My stomach tightened. Dad pointed at me. You, he said, his voice carrying across the chandeliers and cameras, are the biggest disgrace to this family. It landed like a slap. Gasps rippled through the tables. My sister's lips curved into the faintest smile, as though this humiliation had been rehearsed, expected. My mother looked down, fixing her gaze on her diamond bracelet like it could distract her from what was unfolding. I froze. My first instinct was to disappear, to shrink into my chair, to let the moment pass like I always had at family dinners when the insults flew low but sharp. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the weight of years being called unserious. Maybe it was the months of struggling to keep my small podcast studio alive. Or maybe it was the realization that if I let this happen in front of 200 strangers, I'd never respect myself again. I pushed back my chair. The screech of wood against marble cut through the silence like a blade. Every head turned toward me. My palms were sweating, but my voice came out clear, steadier than I expected. Then take me out of your will, I said. Erase me from your plans. I'd rather build something of my own than be a footnote in yours. The words hung there, electric. A murmur rippled across the room. Dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Rachel raised her glass, smirking like I'd just proven her point. My mother flinched, but she didn't move. I didn't wait for a reply. I picked up my clutch, lifted my chin, and walked out. Past the round tables and the frozen smiles. Past the whispers that would turn into stories at every cocktail party for the next decade. Past the family that had never truly been mine. The night air hit me like a wave as the ballroom doors swung shut behind me. Boston's harbor wind was sharp, briny, alive. I breathed it in like oxygen. For the first time in 31 years, I felt free, terrified, yes, but free. Walking away from that room meant more than just leaving a party. It meant leaving behind the illusion that if I worked hard enough, smiled carefully enough, or played my part well enough, I could ever earn my father's approval. It meant choosing myself over a family brand that had never wanted me in the first place. But in that moment, standing under the city lights, heart pounding, palms still damp, all I knew was that the night everything broke was also the night I finally stepped into my own story. When people see the Hayes family on magazine covers or glossy business spreads, they imagine unity, the powerful patriarch, the elegant wife, the perfect daughter standing tall behind them. What they don't see are the cracks. What they don't hear are the silences that echo louder than applause. I was born into a house where love was measured in achievements and affection was rationed like currency. My earliest memories aren't of bedtime stories or laughter in the kitchen. They're of ledgers spread across the dining table, my father's booming voice on late-night calls, and the subtle but constant comparisons between my sister and me. Rachel, my older sister by 3 years, was the golden child from the moment she opened her eyes. She was sharp, obedient, and beautiful in the exact way my parents wanted. She thrived under the spotlight, reciting hotel slogans before she could spell her own name. I, on the other hand, was quiet, curious, a dreamer who carried around a cheap tape recorder instead of dolls. While Rachel rehearsed speeches for the elementary school assembly, I huddled in my bedroom closet, recording the sound of rain pelting the window, whispering into the mic like I was speaking to an audience only I could imagine. Those tapes became my world, little capsules of sound and story. I didn't know it then, but they were my way of building a life outside the one my family forced on me. At family dinners, Dad's questions to Rachel were about market trends, future investments, the importance of staying sharp. His questions to me were always laced with disdain. When are you going to start acting serious? Do you plan to do anything useful? What kind of future comes from sitting around playing with microphones? I learned early on that nothing I loved would ever be enough for him. My mother, Claire, wasn't cruel in words, but she was complicit in silence. She perfected the art of looking away. When Dad berated me for my nonsense projects, she kept her eyes on her wine glass. When Rachel rolled her eyes at me for talking about a new podcast idea, Mom changed the subject to Rachel's grades or her summer internship at the hotel. I begged for her to defend me, but her lips never moved. The only adult who seemed to see me was Aunt May, my mom's younger sister. She was everything my parents weren't: warm, eccentric, unafraid of being messy. On birthdays, she gave me blank journals and mixtapes instead of jewelry or business books. "You don't need to shine like them," she whispered once as she handed me a Walkman. "You need to shine like you." Those words became a secret anthem. School didn't help. I wasn't popular, not like Rachel had been. I was the odd kid with headphones permanently clamped over my ears, sneaking off to the library to edit sound clips instead of hanging out at the mall. Teachers called me creative but distracted. Peers called me weird. At home, my isolation was evidence. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Dad would bark. "Rachel makes us proud. You just embarrass us." By the time I hit college, I had two choices: surrender to the Hayes machine or carve out something of my own. I chose the latter. I enrolled in communications at Boston University and poured myself into radio and podcasting clubs. While Rachel interned at luxury hotels in Paris, I was hauling recording equipment across the city, interviewing buskers in subway stations, telling stories about immigrants, bartenders, single moms. My little podcast, City Echoes, started as a hobby but slowly found listeners: classmates, strangers, then strangers of strangers. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My father dismissed it as a phase. "You'll grow out of this nonsense," he said during Thanksgiving break, swirling his scotch like it held all the answers. One day you'll realize real success doesn't come from chasing fairy tales. Rachel smirked across the table, enjoying the show. But I didn't grow out of it. City Echoes grew with me. By senior year, it had a few thousand downloads, small sponsors, and, most importantly, a community of people who believed in the power of ordinary voices. Still, the more it grew, the more my family's contempt sharpened. Dad offered me internships at Hayes Hospitality, the kind that came with a salary most grads would kill for. I turned them down. Every time, his eyes hardened, like I'd just rejected not a job but his entire existence. "You're wasting your potential," he spat once. "Worse, you're wasting our name." It wasn't just Dad. Rachel thrived on my failures. At dinner, she'd drop casual barbs. "How's your little radio club going?" Or, "Do you even make enough to buy lunch with that hobby of yours?" She delivered each line with a sugar-sweet smile, always loud enough for my parents to hear. Mom said nothing. Looking back, I think that silence hurt more than Dad's insults. Because silence is agreement, even when it pretends not to be. But here's the thing, every insult, every dismissal, every laugh at my expense only pushed me closer to my own truth. I knew I'd never win their approval. So I stopped trying. Instead, I doubled down. I rented cheap recording space with 3 other broke creators. We stayed up until 3 a.m. editing episodes, eating cold pizza, chasing deadlines. I learned to pitch to small sponsors, to edit on free software, to scrape by with almost nothing but stubbornness. When Dad found out, he called it pathetic. When Rachel found out, she called it self-sabotage. When Mom found out, she whispered, "Maybe you should take the hotel job, just for now." But Aunt May. She showed up at my studio with a case of sparkling water and a bag of second-hand acoustic panels. "Build your world," she said. "Even if no one else believes in it." And I did. By the time Hayes Hospitality's 30th anniversary rolled around, City Echoes had grown into something I was proud of. No, it wasn't Forbes-level success, not yet. But it was real. It was alive. It was mine. So when I sat at that glittering ballroom table, 3 rows behind my family's throne, I wasn't just a disgrace. I was a disgrace with something to lose, and something bigger to gain. Because the truth is, I had already been the outsider long before my father's speech. That night just made it official. By my mid-20s, Hayes Hospitality was expanding faster than ever. New boutique hotels dotted the New England coast, each one more extravagant than the last. Rachel was practically running operations already, smiling for photos, charming investors, drafting speeches that sounded like Dad himself had written them. I had City Echoes. By then, it had grown past being a scrappy college project. We had a modest audience, loyal listeners who tuned in every week for stories of ordinary Boston lives. I wasn't famous, but I was fulfilled. That distinction didn't matter to my family. To them, success was square footage, profit margins, headlines. To me, success was a stranger emailing, "Your episode about the busker in Harvard Square reminded me of my dad." Thank you. Dad didn't see gratitude, he saw waste. The breaking point began one winter evening at a family dinner in the Hayes brownstone. Rachel was home from Paris after completing yet another essential management program. She swept in with a new designer bag and a new round of praise from my parents. Dinner that night was roasted lamb, fine wine, and the constant hum of Rachel's accomplishments. Then Dad's eyes locked on me. "Elena," he said, setting down his fork with that deliberate pause that always made my stomach twist, "You're 26 years old. You've had your fun. It's time to be serious." My palms went clammy around my napkin. "I am serious," I said. "About what?" he barked. "Talking to nobodies on your little radio show." He sneered, like the word itself tasted bitter. "You have a last name people would kill for. And you're wasting it. Rachel sipped her wine, her smirk barely hidden. Mom poked at her lamb without looking up. Dad leaned in. Here's how it's going to be. I've arranged a marketing position for you at Hayes Hospitality. Full salary, benefits, travel. You start in 2 weeks. If you refuse, his voice sharpened, each word a nail in the coffin. You're cut off. No more support. No inheritance. Nothing. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I felt heat rush to my face. So you're saying my worth only exists if I work for you? I'm saying, he growled, that loyalty comes before vanity. You either honor this family, or you don't belong in it. It was the kind of ultimatum he'd used on employees, investors, even Mom at times. This was the first time he'd used it on me. Rachel's voice cut in, smooth and sharp. Honestly, Elena, you should be grateful. Most people would kill for an opportunity like this. It's not charity. It's a chance to redeem yourself. Redeem myself. As if loving something outside of Hayes Hospitality was a sin. I don't know what shocked me more, my father's threat, my sister's cruelty, or my mother's silence. She never lifted her eyes, never defended me, never whispered even a small, "Arthur, that's too much." She just let it happen. I stood so fast my chair scraped against the hardwood. No, I said. The word felt like jumping off a cliff. Dad's face darkened. Rachel laughed under her breath. Mom finally looked up, her eyes glassy with fear. No. Dad repeated, like the syllable was foreign. No, I said again. My voice shook, but it didn't break. I'm not taking your job. I'm not giving up my work just to polish your empire. If that means being cut off, then cut me off. The silence was suffocating. For a long moment, all I heard was my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. Dad pushed back his chair. Then you are no longer my responsibility. He left the table without looking back. Rachel smirked, victorious, like she'd just witnessed the execution she'd been waiting for. Mom reached for her wineglass, her hands trembling slightly. That was the night I understood what I was really up against. It wasn't just Dad's wrath or Rachel's smugness. It was the entire machinery of my family, a machine designed to chew up anyone who didn't obey. I walked out of that brownstone shaking, my breath visible in the cold Boston night. I didn't know what would come next. I just knew that if I caved, if I surrendered my life for theirs, I'd never forgive myself. The weeks that followed were brutal. My father's promise to cut me off wasn't idle. He shut down every financial support he had ever provided. My rent, my insurance, even the car he'd technically leased in his name, gone. I had to sell the car within days just to keep my apartment. Rachel sent me a text once, "Told you this would happen. You can still fix it. Call Dad. Beg." I deleted it without replying. Mom called a week later, her voice soft but brittle. "Sweetheart, maybe just take the job for a little while. It doesn't have to be forever." "Whose side are you on?" I asked. Silence. Then the line went dead. But I wasn't alone. Marcus, my boyfriend at the time, stood by me. He wasn't rich, but he was steady. He believed in stories, in voices, in me. "Let's figure this out," he told me one night as we ate cheap takeout on my floor. "You don't need them. You just need to keep going." And Aunt May, of course. She showed up with groceries, cash folded into envelopes, and hugs that lasted too long. "Families like yours only know how to love conditionally," she said, brushing my hair out of my face. "So go build a family that loves without terms." That sentence became a lifeline. I hustled harder than ever. I picked up freelance audio editing gigs, worked late nights teaching podcasting workshops, even bartended on weekends just to keep city echoes afloat. Some days I wanted to quit. But every time I opened my inbox and saw a message from a listener, "This episode made me cry, your stories keep me company on lonely nights," I remembered why I'd chosen this path. The Hayes machine kept moving without me. Rachel was officially named Vice President of Strategic Development. Press releases painted her as the future of Hayes Hospitality. My name was absent, erased like I'd never existed. But while they were busy building hotels, I was building something else: resilience. Because when my father told me I didn't belong in his empire, he thought he was exiling me. What he didn't realize was that he'd freed me. Freed me to make my own mistakes. Freed me to define my own success. Freed me to finally believe that being the outsider might be the only way I'd ever truly belong, to myself. Walking out of that ballroom wasn't just a dramatic exit, it was a declaration of war. Not against my family, but against the voice in my head that had been whispering for years, "You'll never make it without them." The morning after, my phone lit up with messages. Some from acquaintances who had been at the gala. "Are you okay?" That was intense. Most were gossip disguised as sympathy. Rachel texted me once, just 3 words: "You embarrassed us." Mom didn't call. Dad certainly didn't. It was Aunt May who showed up first. She knocked on my apartment door holding a grocery bag with milk, bread, and a jar of homemade soup. She didn't ask questions. She just set the food down and hugged me so tightly I could feel her ribs. "Let them stew in their own bitterness," she said. "You, my girl, have work to do." She was right. That week, I scraped together every dollar I had. I canceled my gym membership, sold old clothes online, and emptied what little savings I'd built. With Marcus's help, my steady, stubbornly supportive boyfriend, I found a tiny office space on the edge of downtown Boston. When I say tiny, I mean tiny. It was basically a closet with one grimy window and peeling linoleum floors. The previous tenant had used it as a storage unit. But to me, it felt like the first piece of land I'd ever owned. Not because of the deed, but because no one in my family could claim it. We scrubbed the walls, dragged in a folding table, and set up one second-hand microphone and a used audio mixer I'd bought off Craigslist. That was the birth of Soundline Studios. I hired one person, Jasmine, a 24-year-old editor with sharp instincts and a laugh that could fill the whole room. She wasn't polished, but she was hungry. I saw in her the same defiance I carried, the refusal to wait for permission. "Are you sure about this?" she asked one late night as we sat surrounded by pizza boxes and wires. "No," I admitted. "But it feels better than being sure about someone else's dream." We got to work. Our first major project was expanding City Echoes. Instead of small, 10-minute vignettes, we began producing longer, more ambitious episodes, half-hour stories with layered soundscapes, interviews, and investigative depth. We recorded in parks, subway stations, diners at 2 a.m. It was messy and exhausting, but it was alive. Marcus helped us with filming. He was a filmmaker by trade, always chasing light with his camera, and he believed in the power of visuals to amplify stories. He'd sit cross-legged on the floor, camera in hand, capturing behind-the-scenes clips for social media. "People need to see the grind," he said. "Not just the glossy finish." And slowly, people did start to see. At first, our downloads crept upward by hundreds, then thousands. A food critic with a large Twitter following shared one of our episodes. A local tech CEO emailed asking if we could produce a branded series. For the first time, the work I'd once been mocked for was paying bills. But it wasn't about the money, not really. It was about waking up every morning knowing the next 12 hours belonged to me. Not my father, not my sister, not the Hayes empire. Me. Of course, breaking away came with its own kind of loneliness. Family dinners continued without me. Holidays passed in silence. I wasn't invited, not even out of courtesy. Sometimes I'd see photos online, Rachel smiling beside Dad at another ribbon cutting, Mom in her glittering gowns, all three of them looking like the perfect family. And I'd feel that old pang, maybe I'd made a mistake. But then I'd walk into the studio, our cluttered little room with wires snaking across the floor, Jasmine hunched over her laptop, Marcus fiddling with his camera, and I'd know I hadn't. Because while they were playing at perfection, we were building something real. The first time I held a sponsorship check in my hands, I cried. Not because it was a lot of money, it wasn't, but because it meant independence. It meant proof that I could survive outside of their shadow. Then came the day Soundline Studios officially launched as a company. Jasmine and I filed the paperwork at City Hall, standing in line between a bakery owner and a landscaping business. When the clerks stamped our forms, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had been the disgrace. The failure. The outsider. Now, I was a founder. That night, we celebrated with cheap champagne in paper cups. Marcus raised his glass. To Soundline Studios, he said. And to never begging for a seat at someone else's table. I laughed, but my throat ached with tears. Because that was it, wasn't it? I had spent my entire life trying to earn a chair at the Hayes table. And when they shoved me away, I finally realized I could build my own. Still, success didn't come overnight. There were setbacks, microphones breaking mid-recording, sponsors ghosting on payments, days when the downloads flatlined, weeks when we wondered if the electricity bill would eat our last dollars. But we kept going. And in the process, something unexpected happened. I built a new family. Jasmine, with her relentless optimism. Marcus, with his quiet faith. Aunt May, always arriving with snacks and encouragement. Even our listeners, strangers who wrote to us like we were old friends. They became the family that chose me, the family I chose in return. It wasn't the kind of family I grew up with. It was better. Months later, I heard whispers through industry contacts that Hayes Hospitality wasn't as flawless as it appeared. One of Rachel's hotel projects had gone wildly over budget. Investor confidence was slipping. But I didn't revel in it. Not yet. Because I knew the machine always found ways to recover. What mattered was this: while they managed marble lobbies and luxury suites, I was building stories that mattered to people. Stories that made someone cry on the subway or smile in their kitchen. Stories that felt more alive than any hotel room ever could. And deep down, I knew the fight with my family wasn't over. Dad's humiliation of me at the gala wasn't the end of his attacks. It was just the opening shot. But by then, I wasn't afraid anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I was building something bigger than their disappointment. And no matter what they tried next, I wasn't going back. Success is a strange thing. When you don't have it, people dismiss you. When you finally start to earn it, they resent you. By the second year of Soundline Studios, our work had gained traction. City Echoes was no longer just a niche Boston podcast, it had become a staple for thousands of listeners across the country. Episodes about immigrant cab drivers, street musicians, and waitresses juggling two jobs were resonating in ways I'd only dreamed of. We'd landed a couple of mid-size sponsorships and had been invited to a regional podcasting festival. For the first time, I thought, we're going to make it. And that's exactly when the storm hit. Her name was Marina Cole. To most people in the industry, she was known as the Queen of Branded Content. She ran a slick, corporate-friendly studio that specialized in producing highly polished shows for big companies. Think glossy audio ads disguised as podcasts. Safe. Sanitized. Profitable. We were nothing like her. Maybe that's why she hated us so much. It started small, a whisper here, a comment there. Anonymous accounts on Twitter claiming our downloads were suspiciously inflated. A podcast blog suggesting our audience growth looked too fast to be organic. At first, I brushed it off. Trolls exist. Haters exist. But then it escalated. One of our biggest sponsors pulled out of a renewal deal, citing concerns about transparency. A journalist who'd agreed to cover our festival appearance suddenly backed out, saying she didn't want to risk her reputation. Even one of our freelance editors quietly stopped taking work from us. The whispers had turned into rumors, and the rumors were turning into fact. I remember sitting in the studio late one night, Jasmine across from me with her laptop open, her face lit by the glow of a dozen tabs filled with gossip posts. "They're saying we're buying downloads," she muttered. "That our audience numbers are fake." I felt my stomach drop. "We barely have money for new microphones. How the hell would we buy downloads?" "Doesn't matter," she said. "People believe the lie faster than they believe the truth." She was right. Within weeks, we'd lost 2 sponsors and a speaking slot at the festival. The email came politely worded, but the message was clear: our reputation was in question. It was Marina's fingerprints all over it. Industry friends hinted she'd been feeding stories to bloggers. A few even said she'd pressured smaller clients not to work with us. It was the kind of underhanded game she excelled at: kill the competition by poisoning the well. Jasmine wanted to fight fire with fire. We should call her out publicly. Release the receipts. Go nuclear. Marcus, ever the calm one, shook his head. "If you play her game, you'll drown in it. Do what you do best. Tell better stories. Prove her wrong with your work." I wanted to scream. I wanted to send Marina an email so sharp it would slice through her corporate armor. But deep down, I knew Marcus was right. So we doubled down. Our next episode was one we'd been sitting on for months, a raw, emotional piece about a street musician named Carlos who had once been homeless and was now rebuilding his life through music. We layered his guitar with the sounds of the subway, his voice trembling as he described nights sleeping under bridges, his laughter breaking through as he talked about finding hope again. It was one of the most powerful stories we'd ever told. When it dropped, something magical happened. Listeners shared it relentlessly. Local radio stations picked it up. Within a week, it had gone viral, not in the million-view YouTube sense, but in the intimate, word-of-mouth way that podcasting thrives on. Emails flooded our inbox. Strangers wrote things like, "This episode gave me hope when I thought I had none." A teacher messaged that she'd played it for her students to remind them of resilience. Even NPR's Boston affiliate called to ask if they could rebroadcast it. In 1 month, our downloads tripled. Sponsors who had pulled out came back. The festival organizers reinstated our slot, this time asking us to headline a panel on authenticity in storytelling. It wasn't just a win, it was vindication. But Marina didn't stop. She pushed harder, planting another wave of rumors, that we bribed guests, that we manipulated analytics, that we faked testimonials. The accusations grew uglier, more desperate. This time, though, people weren't buying it. Because our listeners had become our defenders. They flooded comment sections, wrote blog posts, even created a hashtag #EchoesAreReal, that trended locally. For the first time, I realized something powerful: I wasn't fighting alone. But the fight still took its toll. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if all this chaos was worth it. I'd left behind wealth, stability, and family legacy for this. Scrambling to defend my integrity against lies. Watching my father's smug face on magazine covers while I fought to keep the lights on in a shabby studio. And then I'd think about Carlos, or the immigrant cab driver, or the waitress who cried when she heard her own voice played back on our show. And I'd remember, this is worth it. Because this is real. The final blow to Marina came unexpectedly. A blogger who had been spreading rumors published an exposé, not about us, but about her. Turns out, several of the anonymous accounts smearing us were traced back to IP addresses linked to her studio. Within days, the narrative flipped. Marina's credibility crumbled. Clients pulled out of contracts. She issued a half-hearted apology on LinkedIn, but it was too late. Her reputation was stained in ways she couldn't polish. And us? We survived. We grew. We walked into that festival with our heads high, telling stories not just about resilience, but born from resilience. On stage, under the bright lights, I looked out at the crowd and realized something. This was the family I had always wanted. Not by blood. By choice. It wasn't revenge that fueled me anymore. It was freedom. Freedom from my father's voice in my head. Freedom from Rachel's smug smirks. Freedom from needing their approval. Marina had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she'd only made me stronger. Because when someone tries to bury you, you can either suffocate, or you can grow roots so deep they can't touch you. And I chose to grow. When I walked out of the Harborview Grand that night, I thought I was losing everything. My family, my future, my safety net. What I didn't know was that I was walking straight toward a life I'd build with my own hands. A year later, I stood on a stage under spotlights brighter than any chandelier, holding a glass award that read, Podcast of the Year, Regional Excellence. The applause was thunderous, but it wasn't the sound that mattered. It was the faces, strangers who had become fans, colleagues who had become friends, my team who had become family. Jasmine was crying openly in the front row. Marcus was filming, grinning ear to ear. Aunt May was clapping so hard I thought her hands might break. I gave a speech I hadn't rehearsed. This is for anyone who's been told their dreams are frivolous. For anyone who's been called a disgrace for not fitting into someone else's mold. Your story matters. Your voice matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. It wasn't aimed at my father, but I knew he'd hear about it. People like him always do. After the ceremony, my inbox exploded. Sponsorship offers, speaking invitations, even job proposals from companies that once ignored me. We went from being a scrappy 3-person operation to running a small but thriving studio with multiple shows, a growing staff, and a wait list of clients. But the award wasn't just about validation. It was about vindication. Because while Soundline Studios was thriving, Hayes Hospitality was cracking. Word spread that Rachel's ambitious expansion project had bled money, alienating investors. A few hotels closed quietly. My father, once untouchable, had gone conspicuously silent in the press. I won't lie, hearing that gave me a complicated mix of satisfaction and sorrow. I didn't want them to fail, not really. I just wanted them to see that I wasn't failing. Then, out of nowhere, an email arrived. Subject line, "Can we talk?" It was from my mother. Her words were cautious, almost apologetic. "I miss you. I want to see you. Maybe we could meet for coffee." For weeks, I left it unanswered. Part of me wanted to run straight to her. Another part wanted to hit delete and never look back. In the end, I replied with 2 words, "Not yet." Because I wasn't ready. Not after years of silence, not after her choosing loyalty to Dad over love for me. Reconciliation is complicated. Sometimes love doesn't erase the damage, it just coexists with it. Meanwhile, we kept building. Soundline Studios launched a youth storytelling program in underfunded Boston schools. I'll never forget the first day. A classroom full of wide-eyed kids sat with second-hand recorders, learning to capture sounds, the clatter of lockers, the hum of the cafeteria, the laughter of their friends. One boy, no older than 10, raised his hand and asked, "Can I make a story about my grandma? She always says no one listens to her." I smiled. That's exactly the kind of story the world needs. Watching those kids light up as they heard their own voices played back through the speakers felt like a kind of healing. I'd grown up in a house where my voice was ignored. Now, I was making sure others never felt that way. That program became my proudest achievement, not the sponsors, not the awards, not even the downloads. The kids. Because they reminded me that the true legacy isn't in hotels or money. It's in the stories we leave behind. Of course, life wasn't free of challenges. Marina's smear campaign still lingered in whispers, though most people knew the truth now. A rival might always pop up. But I'd learned how to withstand storms. And my family? They stayed silent. My father never called. Rachel never texted. For them, I was gone. Maybe that was their punishment, maybe their protection. Either way, it was their choice. But here's the truth, I stopped waiting for their approval. I stopped bleeding myself dry for a seat at their table. Because I had built a new table, and it was full. One evening, after a long day at the studio, Marcus and I sat on our apartment balcony, watching the city lights. He asked me, "Do you ever regret it? Walking out that night?" I thought about the chandeliers, the marble floors, my father's booming voice calling me a disgrace. Then I thought about the kids with their recorders, the listeners who wrote to say our stories saved them, the awards sitting on our shelf. Not for a second, I said. Because what I learned is this: family isn't defined by blood or last names. It's defined by the people who clap the loudest when you succeed, who hold you up when you fail, who remind you that your voice matters. My family tried to silence me. My rival tried to smear me. But here I am, louder than ever. And if that makes me a disgrace, then I'll wear the word proudly.